Welcome everyone to the Voice of Terminus show. I'm joined by Lex. Hello Lex.
Hello.
And we have the wonderful Shy in the background to take all your questions during the show and your thoughts and ideas as we go through this discussion.
Don't forget to tag her in the chat so she can get you.
Exactly. Say hello, Shy.
Hello.
So we're here to talk about deities today in Pantheon, and we're going to look at ways that we as players could maybe interact with them on a more meaningful level, and ways that they can even interact with us, the players, and the world itself. But before we go through all that, so let's go and give you a brief introduction into deities itself. Gods watch over the realm of their children walking. Often a god or a given people simply wants their creations to live happily and flourish through this is sometimes met with hostility from an outside source. Be that another god or something else, toes are stepped on and suddenly you have an immortal war that often affects the mortals. How much the deities interact with their children changes from setting to setting. With the celestial barrier in mind, what is the perfect balance for a game like Pantheon? Should deities have direct influence over matters or leave it to the mortals and secret agents? With that in mind, I'll give you a quick brief introduction into the celestial barrier. Set in a place by the ancient dragon Accord, a barrier is set between the mortal and immortal planes. The only way that the celestial barrier can be bypassed is through dissension or a great sacrifice, usually the death of a god who saw it fit to sacrifice themselves. So that's basically a brief introduction into deities and the celestial barrier that we know is a part of Pantheon. And we're going to go and quickly have a look at the list of the known gods that we have, because it's definitely interesting the way VR have approached this. There's not one god for each race. You know, some gods have multiple gods, some only have one, some only have, or basically have 9 that's turned into one. So we have the dwarves basically that consist out of 3 gods, Kazis, Razik and Lockenhammer. Kazis, the high mortal king of the dwarves, took dissension willingly to more closely and effectively look after his people. Forged the dwarves from a fragment of stone from the heart of Coldark Peak and a shard of ice of Ryfell. Razik the Rageful, imprisoned with the tenebrous tundra for wanting to consume the entire dwarven race. There isn't much info on Lockenhammer at this point, so basically those are the 2 that we have, and they are distinctively different. So one basically sacrificed himself, or basically willingly gave up, or descended, to help his people, where the other one basically wanted to try and destroy the entire race, consume it in his own. So we have basically a dark and light god at this point, and Lockenhammer might be the god in between, that's kind of like the one that kind of balances everything out. Then we have the elves. So far there's 2 that are known, Alos and Dathir. Nothing more on that though. And then we have the ogres, who only have a Pantheon name but not much written about their deities, which is Gravenhold. So there could be more than one. That could be a name of a consortium of gods, maybe, what they call them.
It could be just the realm that their gods reside in.
Exactly. And then we have the humans, and we know that's Osari. He who rages, descended to high mortal, deceased. He hated the humans, and there's possibly a manifestation of hate now, and he killed the human king, basically at Haven Song, so that's what we know as well. And then we have the Darkmere, where we know there's 2, Suranai, slaughtered by her own people after she descended to high mortal to give them lungs and feet. Created the Mere to battle Leviathans on Isil, their home plane. And then we have Nithia, god of battle, who's also deceased, sacrificed himself to give the Mere a moment more to live in the unbreathable waters of Terminus. And then we have the Archai, who have Hathus Kevgrel, the dead Hieress. Her status is basically unknown at the moment. Is she truly dead? Is she not? We heard in the interview from Justin and Joppa that presumably she could still be alive. You know, who knows? Or basically be around in some form or fashion. And then the halflings have the 6 wards of Hirith, that's their Pantheon name, and the one that's well known is Kieran, Ward of Flame, cursed to be silent in exchange for watching over the halflings. So he was basically allowed to stay behind, and but not interact with them through speech or anything like that, but was allowed to basically watch over them to make sure everything's okay. And then the Scar, which is basically
9 gods!
9 gods into one. So it's the 9 god. Nothing more is really known about him either, and this definitely makes for a very interesting aspect and view on what we could possibly expect to see, or to even speculate on what we would like to see. What is the purpose of a god in the setting of Pantheon as far as a player is concerned? Definitely a very, very good question and something to look at. So, next, before we go into it, you've played many MMOs, and most prominently EverQuest. Explain how gods were, or the interaction to gods was in EverQuest.
In EverQuest, your god really made very little difference. There were some cities that you might have been able to enter that you couldn't anymore, without having to do a major faction grind. Later on in the game, there was actual armors that were locked to a deity. But as good as those crafted armors were, the raid stuff was always better. Mm-hmm. So it was like, in my opinion, for EverQuest 1, deity choice made little to no difference.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that has become more fashionable nowadays in a lot of games, where the interaction with gods actually plays a more role. In EverQuest 2, for instance, the gods basically disappeared, and then at some point they came back, and then there was a big out war to go and fight these gods, and you could even go out and do a quest series. I think it was a signature quest you had to do, where you could basically get an altar to go and worship a god. You would go and pick out a god. You would actually have to go into a zone and face that god. In some instances, it was just a matter of, getting over your fears and just speaking with him. And with others, it was more like, you had to go out and fight. And that's how you basically became were allowed to worship this god that you chose and everything. So, and I'm sure other games have done it. I just haven't, really played any of the MMOs out there apart from EverQuest. Have you played any other games where there's been gods? There's
been a few, but I mean, honestly, they've been treated more like flavor text or a novelty. Mm-hmm. It really didn't. The choice didn't really matter, because it was like a placeholder in like the dialogue where it would say your deity versus whatever deity, so whoever you chose, it was still the same, just a different name for the deity that you were dealing with. And the sad thing is like, from EverQuest 1 to EverQuest 2, one of the few things that I feel like they did right was they got deities a little more involved in your character's career, basically, because it felt like your deity did kind of matter. Not a lot, but a little bit.
Yeah, they definitely. It was a cool idea. Just it wasn't executed that much, so it became interesting, or became something that you would go out and seek to try and do. And I hope with something like Pantheon, the name itself is a given, that we can actually have more in-depth interaction with the gods. And we've just talked about, and all we've talked about so far are the gods of the races. Don't forget, these beings, these 9 races, were brought to Terminus. Terminus itself has its own gods. Mm-hmm. That's definitely an interesting aspect to view as well. A god is normally a being that is, almighty. They can fight against each other and everything, and kill each other. But it does beg the question, are the gods of Terminus even more powerful than the gods of these 9 races? Because if you look at it, some of these beings basically had dramatic instances on their home planets where they had no choice but to leave and everything. Some others didn't. does this mean that these gods of Terminus are more powerful than the gods of these 9 races? And how could that even play a role later on down the road? They've definitely left a lot of room to expand on this, and ways for us to interact. Because one thing for me is I would like to see more mechanics in Pantheon when it comes to interacting with the deities. I don't want to just, hey, there's an expansion come out where now the gods are available. You go out and do some raiding. You get the fat loot. You go through a quest series, and now you can go and worship or pick a god. I want to see more happen. Something where, especially with the way the races are split up. If you look at the dwarves, for instance, they have 3. The halflings, there's 6 wards that are mentioned. We only know 1 so far. What's with the other 5? How is that going to interact with the individual races? Are the gods only going to be fitted for those races? Or is it going to be a matter of being able to choose whatever god you want, kind of thing as well? Because if you look at the humans, their god, Basari, is basically deceased. I mean, yes, he's descended. He might have, been left back as a manifestation of hate, but he's hated by the humans. Why would the humans want to go out and worship this guy?
Because some humans are just broken.
Some are, definitely. So there's definitely room for that, where I could see some factions go out and wanting to, worship this guy. But let's go and have a look at some of the mechanics that could possibly be brought in into Pantheon. And we'll look at it from the deities' perspective first. I could see ways, if we look at what we know so far, what Pantheon's going to offer us. They're going to offer us weather, they're going to offer us climates, they're going to offer us environmentals, acclimation, and stuff like that. I could see deities also impact some of those as well, where they might mess around with the weather, they might mess around with the climate or the environment or the acclimation system. That might be the cause of some of this, and I think that would be pretty cool to see, where some of the deities might, in certain zones, certain areas, or through certain events, try and meddle with the world itself.
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of felt it was a bit of a shame that with deities, you have a lot of room for some pretty interesting stuff. With Terminus, having old gods and new gods, you would think there would be some kind of ebb and flow of power between the two sets in some manner. The new gods of these new races, or the gods of these new races, are trying to kind of stay with their people. They have to kind of carve out their own territory.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like a territorial thing, because someone else is moving in who was there previously or thinks they own this place is going to try and drive them out.
Yeah.
The gods technically wouldn't be any different,
It kind of looks like, if we look at this, I could see something happening later on in years to come, where maybe these 9 factions come together, the gods come together, form a round table, form an alliance amongst each other to fight against the indigenous gods, because they are trying to run havoc over these 9 races. There's definitely room for stories like this where you could have something like that happen, where we have these 9 races that have come to Terminus or been brought to Terminus for whatever means. We don't know really. And later on down the line, the old gods of Terminus decide to go, hey, we've had enough. We want to eliminate everybody. And now they form this major council, and that's a way to introduce the gods to us. I think that would be a pretty cool backstory for that as well, to see something like that happen.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we know that a lot of the new races have been on Terminus long enough to at least forge empires, and build giant cities. But you could always pull this little trick of lore of how, time moves differently for gods.
Yes.
And an expansion down the road could be that the old gods are fighting back. So I know a lot of people are going to kill me for this, but you could think of it almost like Planes of Power from EverQuest, minus all the bad stuff, which is like 80% of it.
Yep.
But, you know, you have a reason to fight gods now. You have a reason to want them to be destroyed. You know, you have a reason for all these other races to come together on a common foe. And I mean, because of the incredibly smart way that the lore has been laid out, you could do the same thing with the dragons. You could do it with the gods. You could do it with a new element that comes to the planet or realm or whatever you want to call it. You know, and I really, really hope that kind of storyline is leveraged a little bit, because I think it would be a lot of fun, and it would make a lot more sense than how gods have been kind of shoehorned into expansions in the past.
Yeah. So if we look at these gods, right, there's a different amount of numbers of gods for the different races. Some have 2, some have 1, some have 3, some have 9 that's forged into 1. Crazy, right? How do you see it when basically, do you think they should be limited to the races itself, that they, you know, those are the gods that they have and they can pick those gods? Or would you like to see it be where any of these gods can basically be approached by any race?
That's a tough one, because certain cultures want to have these very, very strict boundaries in order to define what that culture is in a game. But there are certain instances where it would make kind of sense for someone to worship another god that might not be of their culture. You know, and it could be because, I don't know, a particular human, he's a wizard, he's in love with the arcane arts to the point where he's abandoned the human gods to go after the gnome deities, you know, or whatever one that's centered around magic, you know. That, to me, in a very rare instance, would make sense. But if you were to allow players to do that, it would have to be, again, an extremely rare instance, and it would be extremely hard to obtain.
I mean, if we look at, for instance, the dwarves, there's 2. Or there's basically three gods that are known. One basically descended willingly, be closer and effectively look after his people. And then there was the other one that got imprisoned because he wanted to try and consume the entire dwarven race. What kind of impact of something like this could that have on the race, the dwarves themselves? We know the dwarves, in a sense, are of good nature or neutral themselves. They have a god that basically wanted to destroy them. Now, if somebody goes, if some of these dwarves out of their faction want to go and worship this Vazik the Rageful, who wanted to basically consume them and destroy them, what kind of impact would that have on the dwarven race itself? Because, you know, they would be kind of like consumed by evil, wouldn't they?
I believe they would. It would obviously put a straight split down the center in their culture to almost a black and white kind of system where you're either good or you're dead kind of thing. We don't know a whole lot about, well, any of the races, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to see where they would go. I mean, you could technically take the evil dwarven worshippers, drive them underground. Or you could... the camera froze up again. Or you could split them off from their culture and turn them into a whole other faction of NPCs.
Yeah.
And just use that for story and content.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the same with the humans. You know, like we mentioned, he hated the humans. Manifestation of hate. He killed their king. You know, so technically, no human would want to worship him apart from the bad ones. But I could see the human race be maybe the one race that has fractions of worshippers for each of these different gods from the different races as well. Like, that would be the faction that would, you know, have its own collective for the dwarven gods, for the elven gods, for the ogre god, for the human god, and so forth and so forth. Whereas some races, you know, they will be inclined to worship anybody else apart from their god. Like the Scar, for instance, or the Darkmere.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of instances where it doesn't make sense for a certain race to worship a other culture's god. I mean, it's just the way it is. I couldn't see a dark mirror worshiping the ogre deities. I couldn't see a Scar worshiping a gnomes. It doesn't make any sense to me. If it could be justified in the lore somehow, then that's different. Then there's actual justification.
So let's assume basically that just for theory crafting and just pure interest in seeing where this discussion will go. Let's say, for instance, now the gods that are available to the dwarves, to the humans, to the other races and everything. Those were the only gods that you had at your disposal. Obviously, with some minor exceptions where you could maybe branch out. Like if we look at the humans, that they're most probably they're the most easiest to be brainwashed to go and worship something else. It's just what how humans are. We're the weakest link, basically. The weakest link when it comes to being brainwashed, but that's
how it works on planet Earth.
The strongest link when it comes to being full of utility. That's why we have all the classes available.
Right.
Would you be fine with that though, Lex? If that were the case, that it's if you're playing a dwarf, it's one of those three. If you're playing a Scar, you've got your 9 god. If you're playing the Dark Mirror, you've got basically the other 2 and so forth. Would you be fine with that? Do you think that's fair?
Well, everyone knows what I plan to play. And I'm completely accepted that I'm going to be worshiping the 9 god, no matter what I want to be or what I want to play, how I want to play. Because I might want to play that, that weird double take kind of character where it's like, yes, I look evil, I act mean, I want to chop people's heads off, but I'm a nice guy, to other players. Will worshiping the Scar change that? Or sorry, will worshiping the 9 god as a Scar change that for me? Well, no, because I'm not that much of a role player. Mm-hmm. If I was, then it would absolutely affect it. Because that would be one more block that I use to build my persona. Mm-hmm. And I can see role players kind of being on the fence here. Yeah. Because the narrow selection of deities will also affect what race you're going to be. To a very, very large proportion here. Because if they don't want to worship the 9 god, and you have to worship the 9 god as a Scar, and they like the look of the Scar or the lore of the Scar, they're gonna have a battle with themselves to figure out if they want to do that or swap to something else.
That's where it comes down to, though, the balancing, the connection of the lore. You have your races that are assigned to certain classes, and that's how they need to approach their gods as well. They need to make sure that their gods are obviously from the lore itself, from the background story, fitting to the race, but also include and take into account what classes they've made available to those races, so that if you do go out and pick, or you pick a Scar as a character, and you pick your class, the Dire Lord or whatever, the god that's available to you has to be fitting to that character as well. So you might have an overpowered god of sorts, for instance, with the 9 god. Let's just presume that the 9 god is one, with the race available. I don't have the back of my head. I think 4 or 5 different classes is what you have available for the Scar. So he would have to consume or be able to offer something in that realm. Now, if we look at Osari, for instance, if Osari for the humans is the only god that we could worship as humans, then he would have to compensate for all of the classes available in some form or fashion as well. That's how I kind of seeing it, how I would like to see it be done as well, to work on that aspect. While it is intriguing to seek out gods from other races, that's where it kind of hits me and breaks a bit of the immersion. for me itself. When I can go out and just do everything and, you know, pick whatever god I want. Some races, like I said, from their lore, from their history, will only worship that one god or their gods within their customs. And the same with it is, and there'll be some races that, you know, they don't really care. You know, they'll just go out and worship whatever's available to them. I'm perfectly fine with that as long as it's balanced out and done correctly.
Right. See, well, everyone knows I'm a programmer. You guys might remember that I actually worked on a game way back when until the studio fell apart. In my spare time, I do like to dabble with game design a little bit, just kind of like I wonder if this would work, I wonder if that would work kind of thing. I'm sure a lot of people do. I had thought a long time ago that I almost want to see deities in the traditional sense become more of a storytelling element versus a character choice. But you could give your character an option to, instead of like choose a deity, choose something to devote yourself to. Because then you could be a human and you could devote yourself to your god if you were a cleric or a paladin or whatnot. But if you were just a simple warrior, you could dedicate yourself to the kingdom. And you could still get a bonus for that. Like, say, when you're inside the kingdom, you get a bonus to some stats or something, just as an example. It was something that, to me, it always seemed like it would be have a little more weight to the decision. Something that everyone would want to consider versus in EverQuest 90, well, not 90, a very large portion of people will choose agnostic. Simply because deity does not mean really a damn thing. So if there's weight behind it, it makes sense. You would probably see a lot more people considering it and actually opting to be a part of that system.
Right, so I actually had an idea for that as well. If we look at human history, you know, there's been mention of gods. You know, if you look at Egypt with the pyramids and everything, you know, and if you look at the Mayan calendar, you know, the Mayans and everything, and the Aztec, you know, there's been references and ruins and temples of hidden trinkets and stuff. I would like to see something like that even be happening in the world of Terminus, where when we came to Terminus, these 9 races, some of their relics went lost that reference their gods and everything. And these are things that we could go out as players and maybe find throughout the world of Terminus. Find ancient ruins where some of these trinkets are still left behind from a god of unknown origin. Because obviously if I'm a human and I find something that's, you know, not resembling Osari, then it's something of unknown origin. I have to learn about it. So this is something where I see a mechanic come into play, where I would love to see us actually earn the right to worship somebody. It shouldn't be a given from the get-go. You know, I should as much have to go out there and prove myself to be able to, you know, claim so-and-so god as my own. In a sense, right. Basically. Yeah,
I mean, that would lend itself towards storytelling elements. It would add a lot towards role-playing. And as long as there is one of these things where it's like, if I choose to do this, I get a reward that's worth my time. Then you've got your standard player like me who doesn't really role-play, etc. There's a reason for me still to do it. And I might get caught up in the story. That's the thing with a lot of these storytelling elements. The more that you have exposure to, granted if they're well crafted and they're not overly just drawn out, each one is a chance for me to get caught in the story.
Yeah.
And that's something else that deities can really do for a gameplay experience. You know, they can draw me into a story.
So let's go and have a look at, you know, us as players interacting with deities, and we'll take the dwarves as a prime example because we know there's one that's good, there's one that's bad, and we already talked a little bit about, you know, what kind of impact this would have. Now, looking at it from a player perspective, dwarves are commonly known to be of good neutral alignment. Now, I go and take on Razik the Rageful because, hey, I've got an evil smile, I've had too much to drink, I want to just go and bash some heads in as a dwarf.
You're going to dress in all green and call yourself the Hulk. So you have to go after the Rageful.
Should picking a god like that that's not in line with my cultural being have an impact, a negative impact, a positive impact. For instance, if I take this Bazik the Rageful, and he's basically of evil alignment of sorts, my charisma, my persona should take a negative hit, maybe.
Maybe not. I mean, just because someone's a Buddhist doesn't make them more charismatic. Doesn't necessarily make them more intelligent or strong. Granted, there's arguments there, I know. Trust me, I know. But in a game, I always thought that the stat bonuses didn't really make a whole lot of sense for deity worship. I could see faction being affected, because obviously the goody two-shoes dwarves might not hate you. I mean, who knows how tolerant they are. They might hate you, they might not. And if they don't, well, maybe they just tolerate you. Maybe you don't get very good prices in town. Maybe not a lot of people want to give you a mission until you find where all the bad guys hang out at. And then you start getting missions from there. If you were to choose something that is not the majority in your hometown, it should steer you away from the majority into your own little slice of that culture. Whereas, again, I'll draw upon EverQuest, where if you're a dark elf and you choose Celescro, the god of fire, it doesn't matter. Nothing really changes. Then you go back and you make another one, the exact same class, dark elf, and he worships Inarok. Nothing really changes in your hometown. You can go to all the same shops, you go all the same places, all the same quests. But honestly, if you're a worshiper of a good deity, almost said diet. If you're a worshiper of a good deity and you need help with something, let's say it's nothing that really important, you just want a little help with something, and I'm a worshiper of an evil deity. I got that guy's icons branded into my forehead, you know.
Hey,
do you really want my help? Oh, I'm fully dedicated. I am dedicated.
You're a
but do you really want my help? I mean, granted, if it was a life or death situation, you'd probably take any help. So that would make sense. But if it's like, oh, find my dog, are you going to see this evil guy and go, he's more likely to eat it than give it back? I don't think I want his help. So I shouldn't offer that, or you shouldn't offer that quest to me. Yeah. But it would make sense why. But that being said, you know, someone else should offer a quest just to be even.
Yeah, I definitely like that, you know, where you have like a faction hit or something like that, where certain quests might not be available to you right away. Even your perception taking a hit at some point. It's definitely a cool way to go. Trying to catch my thought here, but you know, that's the kind of hits that we would take, and that's definitely a good thing. Now, whenever and if we ever do get to interact in these kind of forms with the gods, and we get to pick some god that we want to worship, how would you like to see that done? You know, would you like to be something more traditional, where there's a god for each class or race, and basically you go out, you might have a special AA tree, a system for the gods or whatever, where you can basically put points in, or would you like to see something done differently with that?
That's a really tough one for me. I do like traditional to a point. As long as there are subtle changes to make it fresh. To my experience, being someone who has played like everything under the freaking sun, and that's not easy. To make it fresh, you end up having to go so far away from traditional that it might as well be something completely new. But if it's completely new, it has to feel like it's been designed and crafted with a lot of care. You know, not like it was just slapped in because it's different, like it's a novelty to catch my interest for a short time.
Yeah.
If I were talking to VR directly, I would say percentage-wise, 20% traditional, 80% something completely new.
Mm.
But that's because I have faith in them that whatever they touch, they're going to make it a labor of love.
Yeah.
Whereas if I were talking to EA or Tryon or one of those other B grade studios, I would say stick it to traditional, because I wouldn't trust them to do anything but.
Mm. Okay. With the different kinds of gods that we've got for all the race and everything, would you? This is also touched on the traditional what we just talked about. Do you think it should be an even spread for each of these 9 races, or would you like to see some mix up there as well, where it's not going to be all the same approach for all of these 9 races? So one race might do it through a series of quests to get to know their god and be able to worship him. Others might have to go out and find trinkets and hidden tombs and explore dungeons and stuff like that, and others do it through the perception system. Would you like to see something like that done, or would you like to keep it more along the lines of traditional, where, hey, if gods are available to everybody, then it's, one path for all? Or would you like to see it more connected to the lore, maybe, and spiced up a bit and made it different? Because that also adds to the flair as well, of going out and trying out new races. Oh, I just lost Lexa completely there. X? Why did Skype turn off? Give me a second, guys. We have lost my peeps. Don't know what happened there.
Aha! So we're back? Okay.
Yeah, we're back.
He's back.
Here's Yarny. It actually got me on a thought process that actually I would really, really enjoy, is what if you started out being either agnostic or in a very narrow predefined deity set for your culture. But what if there were ways that you could worship the old gods, the old gods of Terminus, where you could find trinkets of their, like pieces of their icons, pieces of their altars, clues to find some of their worshippers, and then eventually join that cult, religion, whatever you want to call it. It would be like an epic growth to your character to be able to change deities in a meaningful way.
Actually, I want to expand on that as well. Just, this is now for lore purposes and RP and everything, right? But imagine if you could do that, right? And those people, those different people from the different races who go out and worship the old gods, and I'll get to how it could be done. If that now opened up a new haven, a new city, where people that worship the old gods are kind of like outcasts from their original heritage. So now you've got like a city where there's Scar, there's Ogre, there's Human, there's Dwarves, there's Mir and everything. That would be pretty cool on an RP aspect and from a storytelling thing. And now to touch on what you said about how you could possibly maybe do that, I would like to see the Celestial Barrier come into play for that. Where, we know it's basically a barrier set between mortal and immortal planes. Now, maybe that's the goal of all of us, is to find a way into that immortal plane, to face the gods of Terminus, or the god of Terminus. We don't know how many there really are, or if there are any still. And that's probably, that might be a really cool grind as well, because obviously this is something that would be very hard to do, And this would offer something unique as well, because I think if you do something like that, where you can choose to worship the older gods or the gods of Terminus instead of your own, and you go through this celestial barrier and you face these gods, you overcome whatever challenges they throw at you, you come back. You want people looking at you in awe, going, wow, this dude has actually made it into the celestial barrier, taken on whatever challenges the old gods threw at him, and he's come back alive to tell about it. This is something that it's like 1 in 100 people can do it.
Right. I mean, it would be almost like an epic, but it would be a spiritual epic.
Yeah.
Almost for your character. I mean, granted, you would have to get an ability or some kind of cosmetic or a title or something,
Yeah.
Something that would make it obvious at a glance that you have performed this difficult feat.
Yeah.
And you'd have to balance it very carefully. It would have to be almost almost like soul crushing to go through it. But the reward should be worth it. It's almost like doing the shawl quests in EverQuest 1, where if you've ever tried to do them, they can literally destroy your soul. But when you get it, it's like, oh my god, back in the days of Velius, you're just like, if someone had that, they were amazing.
Yeah, definitely. So I talked about basically, temples and ruins and stuff like that. Maybe there's a way to kind of make it easy on everyone, or offer a multitude of ways to even approach these gods. Like we said, you could do it through questing and everything, and you might get the basic understanding of your god. But maybe you could offer as well, have some, for those that really want to go full perception, basically. We do know that, taking on perception and becoming a keeper is going to play a major part and have major benefits over those that don't. Maybe that's another way of approaching it with the deities as well. You could have maybe some ruins and temples out there that are lost and there to be found, and those that want to go and do it, they get a deeper backstory on their god. Maybe that's maybe a way to balance that out.
You could even put it into being a lore keeper, where you can, because you have this vast pool of knowledge to draw upon, you can walk into the old ruins of a temple and you can decipher what the text is on the wall. You can find an old book on one of the gods and you can slowly decipher it, leading you on the path to become a worshiper of whatever crazy god name you can think up.
Yeah. I mean, all we've done now so far is looked at ways we as players and the ways these deities can interact with us. I mean, I definitely let's go and have a look at one other aspect of the game: crafting. Maybe there's a way to bring crafting into the mix as well when it comes to the deities.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I mentioned before that in EverQuest 1 there was armor that was deity specific. And it was very good armor, for its era. If you could actually find, say, an armorer who worshipped, I'm just going to use the non-god, it's the only one I care about, they could add like a sigil of the non-god to it. We'll just say that's what it's called, and that adds additional stats. But they're stats that make sense for that particular god.
I'm actually going a bit further with this. So, I've talked about finding trinkets and old, indications towards, the gods out there. Let's say, for instance, now you find some kind of scroll, it's ripped in half. Now, and somewhere down the line you find a second piece. You now go to a scribe and he kind of mashes it down together. And that basically would hint or bring the clue that you have from the one piece to the second, bring it together and give you one. It's the same with armor pieces as well. Maybe there are armor pieces out in the world that are godlike, that give you godlike powers, but they're hey, let's take Braveheart, right? Braveheart got chopped up into 5 pieces and spread out through the whole UK. Maybe that's how the armor's approached as well. Maybe somewhere in the 4 corners of Terminus, there's, pieces of armor that when forged together, form this awesome breastplate.
Yeah. I mean, you could do it with a single piece, you could do it with a set, whatever you really want to do. Shards of a sword, pieces of a bow, pieces of a shield, or just gauntlets, greaves, boots, chest plate, helmet, whatever, The question remains, though, stuff like that, would you want them to be for every deity or deity locked, meaning you would have to actually follow the deity that these represent in order to wield them?
It all depends on which way they go. Now, I'll approach the way I was thinking about it. Let's say there is, later on in years to come, an all-out war. Race deities against the old deities. Now, the race deities find out about these armor pieces that were used by whoever was, last on turn. Maybe the dragons, fought the deities as well. And they had dragon armor, basically. So you got this dragon armor spread out. That basically, the deities, they couldn't destroy it, but so they hid it. The old deities hid them in Terminus. They scattered it all over the place. Now you have to, you have to go out and find these pieces, and it doesn't matter which god you represent from the races, you can still wear that armor. That's the one side of things. Now, go on.
What if you were to just take shards of the armor and use it as almost like a crafting component that just boosts the result?
That could also, be done as well, that you find shards.
Yeah, because, when you say dragon armor, I think of a dragon wearing, big, shiny pieces of metal. It's like, I can't really see him wearing a breastplate.
Yeah,
because, let's face it, dragon scales are pretty much armor.
I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was just,
trying
to give the picture.
I know someone's watching out there that's going, dragons don't wear armor.
Who knows? Who knows? Anything's possible. That's one way of looking at it. Maybe that there's you have to get these dragon shards that reinforce the armor that you have, so you can go out and take on these deities. Because that's another thing that I kind of have seen lacking in a lot of games, a lot of MMOs where you have gods. There was never really any armor that was unique to take on a god. This guy's a god, for Christ's sake, or this female, or this being. It's a god. The armor I'm wearing that I got from the highest raid shouldn't be able to take on a godlike form, no matter how good or how hard it was to obtain this raid gear. This should be special armor for me to take on these gods, and that would add another aspect to the game as well. When it comes to that, you've got your traditional group content, you've got your raid content, and then you've got your god content. Adds a complete new level to it. Adds a complete new twist to the game as well.
Right. Well, it's like I always, especially in EverQuest, but I will start this by saying that the storyline to Planes of Power was very thin. But I never really understood how, doesn't matter how many mortals you are, this being is called a god for a reason. And it's like we're getting these things on farm, meaning we could take them with our eyes closed. Granted, it's still not an easy fight, but should mortals ever actually be able to kill a god?
Oh, it's been done in plenty before.
It has. And I've always been a little confused at that. It's like, these things are God. The gods are supposed to be immortal, and the only way that theoretically you would be able to kill a god is by destroying all the worshippers and no one remembers them.
Yeah, but if you look at the old Egyptian god history, if you look at that, they were made out to feel like God, but they weren't really gods,
Right.
So, that's kind of, mind tricks, playing tricks with their worshippers, basically. You know, who's to say that they really are gods? You know, who knows? And
Right.
that's the thing. But what kind of ways would you like to interact or get your information on the deities, basically? You know, we obviously have factions. We know that's a given. I would like to see libraries throughout Terminus that reference knowledge on them, or like trinkets and stuff like that I can find, or have certain NPCs, or even maybe some religious guilds in Terminus that might, you know, explain more on them as well. I just don't want, you know, I don't want it to be too linear and too basic in its form. There should be plentiful ways to go out there and experience the interaction when it comes to deities. And again, because we talked about this quite a lot, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, this is something that has to be forced onto everybody. We've already said, you know, we would like to see different ways, different options for people that do have an interest in wanting to know more about them and know more about the lore. They can go out and really, you know, get their hands dirty and dig deep. And, you know, there should be a even balance in some form, but it should still be meaningful. It should still be something that would, you know, take its time to go out and find. I don't want an expansion to come out and, hey, guess what? Now you can pick a god.
Right. Picking a god is pretty integral to one of your character's building blocks. Like, I'm sorry, it's one that's always been shoddy, wobbly, and made of wood. Mm-hmm. We want it to be just as substantial as everything else that makes your character, well, whatever you want it to be.
The game is called Pantheon.
Right. They should have a very, very large role to play.
Definitely.
Or at least it should feel that way.
A few things to note that we didn't mention at the very beginning of the show. We were meant to be giving a few t-shirts away, but we haven't got our system set up yet for this.
Sorry, I've been busy.
We will be doing this though in the next 2 weeks. You know, either next week Friday we'll be doing it, or the week after that. We will definitely get around to giving away 3 t-shirts. We're sorry because I forgot to mention at the beginning, we haven't got our system up to date yet to do something meaningful and worthwhile for you guys to get your hands in. But we will get to that, and we will be doing the giveaway either next week or the week after, the latest. You got anything to add, Lex? Any ideas? Anything that's, you know, sparked your mind that you would like to see?
If I do any, like, we know that our characters are going to be like an EverQuest. You're not special. If you want to be a hero, then go be a hero. If you want to be a bad guy, go be a bad guy. You know, you are what you want to be in this style of MMO. So I don't think the deities should ever really single you out for a storyline or a quest line. You need to seek them out. If you want to be the holy warrior of whatever god you choose, then you need to put in the effort.
Yeah.
You need to seek out these people. Maybe you need to spend some time. Maybe you need to donate to a church. Maybe you got to go spend some time praying at an altar, you know, or doing a quest line that proves your dedication.
Who was that? Smoko brings out a cool idea as well, and actually, something I'd like to quickly. Excuse me, people. I'm trying to fight this cold. Quickly want to bring up. We did a show a long time ago on real life holidays in game and what that could possibly be. Now, what if there were actual days in the calendar of Terminus where each individual race celebrated their gods or did something of that sort? Would you like to see something like that? It could be like, you know, a global event similar to like the bazaar in, I think it was bazaars in EverQuest 2 or in World of Warcraft, where they had the moving caravans go around and, you know, put up shop, and you could, you know, take part and play games. You could do something similar with the deities as well. Because we do know that the Darkmere, if I remember correctly, they celebrate, I think, 7 days of mourning, 7 days of worship, and 7 days of blah blah blah. I think it was something like that. They have multiple, you know, it's a longer event for them where they go through the.
I would love to see that, and I know someone at VR is going to curse my name, because if I was on the other end, I would be. I don't want to see one global server event where everyone worships their god. That's much easier to do for the developer side. Okay, it just doesn't make sense. It would actually kind of pull me out of the game a little bit, and a lot of people would end up not enjoying it, because what if you want to go experience someone else's festival?
Yeah.
Which, by all means, you should be able to a point. So, say the Darkmere, how they have 3 weeks for their celebration, then you should have a celebration for 3 weeks. And it should be held in a time that would kind of fit the lore. Like, we'll just say summertime. Okay, just for whatever reasons. But that doesn't mean that the gnomes...
Because that's when the water's the saltiest.
Sure. I don't know. But, meanwhile, the gnomes, maybe they celebrate whatever festival they want to do for their gods, or in the springtime. Well, then it should be in the spring for however long it should be, according to lore. And now, because the lore is very kind of Swiss cheesy right now, and I say that in a good way, not a bad way, it leaves a lot of room for VR to basically be like, okay, if we're going to do a festival for each deity, for each town, then this one's only going to be for 7 days. This one's only going to be for 14 days, you know, and they can really kind of cut it down. But you can automate it all once it's set up. But I think we even got into an episode way back about festivals and holidays. Yeah. And all that stuff still applies. Like, I don't want to say the same stuff all the time, but you can do the same stuff for 2 years in a row, or, you know, kind of thing. But that's just me being picky at this point. You can, whoever from VR is watching this, you can stop throwing popcorn at the screen saying, "Boo, Lex, go away."
Actually, I know, I support you on that, definitely. It shouldn't be just, you know, we'll pick one random day or whatever, one random week or one random month in our human calendar, and we'll say, right, this is now the month of deities. It should fit the lore. It should fit the setting and everything. It should fit the time frame that, you know, whatever they said, however they celebrate, and it should also fit the theme as well.
Right.
You know, and I mean, you should feel that first week by the, you know, for the Mere, that first week of mourning.
Right.
It should feel sad.
It should feel as it should be if you were actually inside that world.
Yep.
But that's immersion, right?
Yeah.
Like, on the flip side, me being a Scar, or wanting to be a Scar, I don't see them celebrating. They don't seem like the, "Hey guys, let's party" kind of type. So personally, if there's not a celebration, I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
Because to me, it makes sense. And if I want to be a Scar, then I have to take all the good and the bad. So, hey, you don't got to make one for the Scar.
So, Shy, anything from chat?
Yes. We have one question from Coach asking, do you think whatever belief system that they make available, since the game is a rags to riches feel, shouldn't you be able to change your beliefs? Within the scope of your race and class, for example, the rogue who starts out as a street urchin, who believes in nothing but his own ability, through his journeys and interaction, decides to serve some other purpose.
He makes a very good point. I think it should be. You should have the option, because that's another sign of personal growth for your character. I mean, people in the real world, they lose faith and gain faith all in the span of a few years. You know, I don't see why your character shouldn't be afforded that same kind of experience, because maybe a player has a crisis in faith. So they can actually get out that frustration or that worry or whatever with their character in game. You know, and it could help them along the way. Mind you, that's not really the purpose of the whole thing, but why not? As long as there is a process and they hold to that process.
Yeah, it would have to be something that, you know, isn't just a click of a button, right? I stop worshipping. Obviously, you know, there's going to be events or reasonings behind why you don't want to worship this person, or you want to take on a certain faith. Now, if you want to take on a certain faith of a different race or whatever, then you would obviously have to go and consult somebody from that race, you know, because obviously you're going to have to find out the information about it. So it shouldn't be something that's easily done, but it should be something you could do, for sure, with the means necessary for you to go and do that. Right.
It's one of those things where it's like I'll go to EverQuest 2 for a minute here, and basically like the betrayal quest. You know, that was a big deal because it was good city, bad city. Mm-hmm. You know, that was a big deal in terms of your character's persona. But with deities, it's one of those things where if you're not that faithful to your current deity, swapping to a new one isn't that big of a deal. But if you are like strictly devoted to your deity for what could be in-game years, you know, switching deities would be a much larger blip on your lifeline, you know? It's a bigger deal.
That brings me to a quick question as well, Lex. What if there is even a mechanic where your devotion is also measured? The more devoted you are, the more benefit you're going to have. The more loved you're going to be by your god or whatever, or you know.
Right.
So for instance, now this rogue that's having second thoughts, who's now trying to seek different perspectives, he's not putting too much devotion towards his god. That might have an impact on him somehow.
Right. I mean, honestly, okay, from a game designer's point of view, this would be a way to increase grind time, something else to do between leveling. You know, give people one more task that they can do before they get tired and move on.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. I would be very careful about making it too grindy, because it really feels like one of those things that would have to be grindy.
Yeah.
You know, and you could take that whole status system from EverQuest 2 as an example. Great in theory, but it ends up becoming this huge pain in the butt where it's like constantly trying to get these things to sell for status points. You know, and that's just what I kind of look at in terms of, if I were to cheap out and make a system like that, how would I do it? I'd do that. I don't ever think VR would do that, though. So, but doing this whole devotion idea or level of devotion to a deity is a great prospect. Maybe it's something you do have to maintain. Maybe not at a crazy level, like you don't have to do something every day to maintain your current rank, but at least once a month you should probably pray at an altar or something, depending on the god, and maintain your current status. You know,
maybe there could be a way, like, where if you do it once a month, for instance, and you don't do it, maybe your devotion, maybe you have a devotion bar that goes down, like beloved, neutral or whatever, and questioned, and maybe they could even add some kind of mini system into it that if you hit the questionable mark, you might have to go out and do some extra chores.
Right. I mean,
some extra tasks.
No matter what you do in Terminus, as your character, you have to start at the bottom. Like Coach just said, that it doesn't really make sense to start off with max faction with a god, and I agree 100%. Because if a deity gives me max faction the day I walk through that door, that's a little too needy for me.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to move on.
Well, you know, that's the thing, though. Maybe there are some gods out there, and we know there are, that want you to worship them, that they will force their worship on you. And, you know, it could be the case with the Nine God, because they're so scared of him or it alone, you start off with a max faction, whereas the human race doesn't. You know, we hate the dude.
That could be a racial bonus.
Yep.
You know, that you get, say you're a human paladin, well then you get a faction boost to this deity or this deity.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. You know, that's a reason right there to start off and actually play a human, because if the deity system was made to where that small faction boost makes a sizable difference, humans are now, in my eyes, in the running to make this character simply because of that bonus.
Yep.
Whereas personally, I think humans are the most boring, worthless characters to put in a game.
Because, you know, like Coach said, it shouldn't be something you have straight away. You know, depending on what god it is, obviously, as well. Like I said, some gods will want you to worship them, and they'll force their worship down your throat. Some won't. Some did it out of devotion, out of love to their race. So, for you to give back or want to worship some of these gods, you might have to go out and do and struggle and prove your right, prove your willing,
right.
Prove your devotion towards them. So it's like a faction, essentially, where it grows over time. And
right.
once you've reached, let's say, that max faction or that limit where it is, where you basically become one of the insiders of the deity, that's
mm-hmm.
when you now might unlock the right to learn about the god and maybe some of his special abilities that he might bestow upon you, and so
right.
forth.
Right, and like the thing is, to gather devotion with, like, say, an evil god. Did my god make me do evil things?
Yeah.
Bonus points to VR if they can. Me as a Scar, as a worshiper of the Nine God, can make me sit there and look at a decision of something to do and go, "Oh man, I don't know." It's like, I don't know, man.
Well,
all of a sudden.
This brings me back to the mechanic I mentioned earlier on, where basically you have your persona, your charisma impacted, that I was talking about. Maybe this is a way of doing something like that, where you have a devotion bar. Now, you might be a Scar, Lex, but you want to be a good, nice, goody two-shoes Scar. So now, your devotion level is obviously in the opposite direction. You're not doing what your enemy do. You're not smashing up halflings and, you know, kicking them off trees and stuff like that, and cooking them and frying them up and whatnot. You're not throwing a dark mirror into a pan and everything. You're doing good stuff. Maybe that does have an impact on you somehow.
I would be careful not to add that too much, though.
Yeah, it should be a small thing. Something,
right.
Something of a fun.
Right, because, I mean, I saw it in chat that someone mentioned SWTOR, and that just got me thinking of the dark side, light side thing, where they're like, your choice matters. No, it didn't. It didn't matter at all, you know? And I'd be very, very worried about that, getting that kind of system in any other game, because it was so what's a polite word to say here for that? Craptastically designed and crafted. You know, it was terrible. So I'd be worried that a system like that would become the devotion system.
Yeah. Where
it essentially in the end doesn't matter.
You know, some things should be done in fun, obviously, and that would be something like that, where it doesn't necessarily have an impact on your playstyle or anything like that, but it might give you a crafty, nifty title or something like that.
Right.
That you can earn. Or you have a Scar with angel wings.
Let's not go that far. I'd chop them up. It'd have to be a good old, you know, Chicken Wing Tuesday.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you chose something that was aligned with your deity, I could see you getting a small bonus. You know, maybe a little bit of your devotion, maybe a few extra gold because the guy that you're dealing with worships the same deity. You know, nothing huge, nothing game breaking, but a nice little bonus of like, oh, you know, deity bonus. So you're like, hey, I just got a reward for following this deity.
So
now it's suddenly I'm visually seeing reasons of why I should have followed this person. You know?
What if? Here we go now. What if on character creation you could choose a benefit from the get-go from the racial deity?
Depends on what kind of benefit.
You know, something not something major that's going to, you know, be groundbreaking and you know, destroy the balancing of the game. You know, something that maybe this deity of the dwarves has a small bonus to your armor, or to your mitigation, or the dark mirror, for instance. You get a small bonus when you're underwater. You know, you can swim faster.
Right. As long as it's, you know, if it's minimal, sure, no problem. But I say minimal, but not too minimal to where you can't notice its effects, which is very hard to do. It's one of those things where it's like you have two characters running side by side, and one very, very, very slowly starts going faster. That's the kind of thing that I feel would be an acceptable bonus for your deity choice. Because there's obviously a benefit here. It's just to the point where it's like over a 50-meter run, you might get there a second, maybe half a second earlier, you know? Yeah. Where the person who doesn't have it doesn't feel like they are worthless because they don't have it. Yeah. But I would also, if you're going to add benefits to those that are adventurers or raiders, you know, we're just going to call them adventurers to make it easy. Because we know crafters are a huge portion of Pantheon, they're finally going to get their day in the sun. I would like to see some deities that have crafting benefits as well. I mean, maybe let's just go completely off the rails here and say that the dwarves have 5 different deities. Well, one of them is you know, something the smith. So if you were worshiping him as a blacksmith, an armor, or weaponsmith, to me that would make sense that you could get a bonus to those for worshiping him. Maybe not a major one, maybe you just start off a few points higher. But it makes sense that you get that bonus.
Yeah, definitely. Any more questions, Guy?
Actually, yeah. Dayhawk just actually came up with a very good question. What if they did a system where you pick your deity, and as you build faith with one, it lowers the others? But as you build up and hit milestones, you unlock different teachings that improve your character, like in God of War, where you hone your combat skills.
I do like that. But the only problem with it that I see is for, like with the Scar, we only really worship the 9 god. So it's like you go up to get benefit or you get nothing. There's no we get benefits in something else. Personally, that doesn't bother me, because if the 9 god is the only thing I can worship as a Scar, then I should probably worship him. You know, it would force people into the playstyle of that culture. Not necessarily a bad thing. Some people might find it more of a pain.
Well, you know, it all depends on how they approach this. You know, this could actually work for Pantheon. Depending on how they approach the lore and everything, each race has their god, blah, blah, blah. We have the old gods as well. Maybe some higher beings have ascended down onto Terminus and spoken to all these races and told them of this system out there, this star system or whatever. Yeah, we'll call it that. Where you could use the idea from Day. Where basically you might have your own god. You know, you could maybe have a symbol on your armor that represents that god and everything. But this is kind of like a system you go through where all these gods have come together and formed this star chart kind of thing where you unlock. I see you going there.
I got it. Day, tell me what you think about this. That system where you can go basically like seesaw in between different deities, but only to like midway. That's how you would be agnostic. where you could very easily kind of swap between them, but you could never max out. But if you dedicate yourself to a deity, then you can max out. But you don't get the benefit of that little seesaw game kind of thing. See, that I'd be like, oh, there's a reason to be agnostic, but are the bonuses worth being dedicated to a god? I'm going to spend an extra hour at my character screen now.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely an interesting look and approach to it, where you could have, like, you know, it's been done in other games, obviously. One to note is what's that sci-fi game?
You're gonna have to be a little more specific than that.
Something.
Skyforge.
Is it Skyforge where they have that?
Skyforge.
Where you go through the different.
You're basically a god, like a demigod.
Yeah.
You converse with the gods and do stuff with the gods. God, that game was terrible.
You got that ascension tree where you can go on the left, the right, top, down, everything, or different animals. So it's something similar to that. I do like your approach, so Lex, where you can't max anything out, but you can basically go and
a little bit into everyone, because it's kind of like, yes, it's like the gods kind of rewarding you for, you know, kind of helping them out, even though you're not on their team.
Maybe that's maybe that's part of the lore later. Who knows? You know, maybe that could be embedded into the story. Maybe that is what might happen. Think about it. That would be a pretty cool approach to the deity lore. There is definitely there's a war forging. There's basically a war forging. The deities of old want to run havoc on this world because we caused so much shit and pain, and we basically kind of ripped up their living room. Yep, we're tearing Terminus apart and destroying its whole sense of being and everything. They've had enough.
This was a nice place until the halflings got here.
Now there's this one neutral god of sorts, or maybe he's, you know, higher, even a higher sense of a being. Comes down to all 9 races. Informs us about this, warns us about this, and offers us a way out, where we basically take on the idea from Dayhawk with the twist of Lexa, where we learn these abilities, and that's basically your entrance into the godlike armors, abilities, and everything to take on the gods, maybe later in years to come. I think that'd be pretty cool to see.
It would be an interesting, like, say, an expansion storyline, where you could say, instead of having a full culture come to Terminus, just a rogue god arrived, and you could make him like Loki, you know, where he's just here to cause problems. So one of the ways he's causing problems is making the mortals go beat up the gods.
Yep. Definitely.
It would certainly be better than a couple other storylines I could think of.
There's definitely a lot they can do with this. We will definitely be doing a show from the lore perspective on this with Monster Koala at some point. Get him into it. And obviously, we'll have to see where Pantheon go and what deities mean in Pantheon anyway. This is just theory craft, speculation. Anything else out there? Any thoughts, ideas, Shy? Any additional questions you got?
Nope.
Nope. We hope you enjoyed the show. Hope it gave you some ideas, some thoughts to speculate on, discuss, talk about. Again, we apologise for not being able to do the giveaway, but we will get to it either next week or the week after that, the latest. We promise, and we'll be giving away 3 of these awesome t-shirts for you guys to take part in live during chat. You won't have to do anything horrendous. It will basically be a randomly picked winner of sorts, or some question answer game or whatever. We'll see what we do when we get to it. Next week's show is, I got to think now. I don't remember. What do we have planned for next week? Let me have a look.
Your guess is as good as mine. I don't work here.
I haven't been working here either for a couple of weeks. Oh,
I just live in chat.
we will be talking about teleportation and binding.
Uh-oh.
A very interesting topic and a very touchy one, as it is as well. So join us next week, and hopefully I'll be feeling a lot better by then. And we'll see you all next Friday, the teleportation and binding. Shai, great job again.
Yes.
And
Thank
Lex,
you, sir.
brilliant as always. And we will see you all.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say don't come back.
And we should
And,
also mention. We should also mention, for those of you in the U.S., Happy Father's Day.
Oh, is it Father's Day in the US? Is it?
Father's
Sure.
Day on Sunday.
Oh, okay. Well, happy Father's Day on Sunday to those in the
I ain't no
US.
daddy, so I don't know.
I will celebrate it regardless. It's a Father's Day, for Christ's sake. You don't get those often.
Only once a year. It's not like they happen.
Actually, I get them twice a year because I celebrate German
You can take
and
credit
English.
for anything you can get your paws on.
Oh, definitely. hey, my father-in-law's even worse. He celebrates his name's day as well.
Oh, jeez.
Yep. And yes, Zathris, again, being awesome in chat. With that, guys, take care, and hopefully I'll be feeling better next week. My head wasn't really here today. I apologise. See you then.
Be safe, everybody.
Take care. Enjoy your weekend.